What's going on, everyone? Ruben here. I just wanted to take this time, end of 2020, to talk about some of my favorite books of the year. So before we get there, please take the time to hit that like button, leave a comment below, share some love, maybe share it with a friend. I'm just gonna jump into it. And the first book we have here is a book that I got for my birthday last year. It's called Musashi. So we have Musashi here. 900-page tome. This book did take me a while to finish it, but one of my favorite books of this year. And there's no chronological order here, but just want to talk about a little bit about why this book really made the cut. And you're talking to someone who's probably read over 25 books this year, including audiobooks. Some of the things that come up is that this book has stood the test of time. And something that I've always learned is that if a book stands the test of time, that's something that should be read, right? So Musashi is one of those, written in 1935. It was translated to English sometime in the 80s and has been on bookshelves ever since. So that's a big deal because not a lot of books make it that far. Now, I have some notes here, so I'm going to read some of the quotes on why this is such an amazing and beautiful book. So the first quote is my favorite quote from the entire book, something that really stuck to me. It was one of those quotes that make you shut the book. Here goes. Aspire to be like Mount Fuji, with such a broad and solid foundation that the strongest earthquake cannot move you, and so tall that the greatest enterprises of common men seem insignificant from your lofty perspectives. With your mind as high as Mount Fuji, you can see all things clearly, and you can see all the forces that shape events, not just the things happening near to you. And I love that idea of being the mountain, right? Broad, solid foundation, especially if you're a man. I highly recommend this book for young men because it really talks about like the healthiest parts of masculinity. Another quote that really stuck out that I want to share with you is this: there is nothing outside of yourself that can ever enable you to get better, stronger, richer, quicker, or smarter. Everything is within. Everything exists. Seek nothing outside of yourself. And Musashi, not only was he a great warrior, I mean, historically they say he was never defeated. He was an undefeated samurai. Obviously, if a samurai was defeated, that meant death. And he got to live into his old age. He wrote books like the Book of Five Rings, which is another book I read many years ago. But what I loved about Musashi, and my biggest takeaway from it, is that you can be a master at many things. A master samurai at that, a Ronin technically. He wasn't really a samurai because he had no allegiance to any emperor. He was not only a warrior but also a poet, and he was an artist as well. So it really stuck out to me, the fact that he was able to master all these different things. Apparently he did beautiful art, sold many of his paintings, and throughout the book you see a lot of his poetry. If you read the Book of Five Rings, there's a lot of poetry in it. Now, I'm not a big stickler for poetry, but as of late these things have been coming to me more and more. So Musashi will be that first book here. So the second book we have here was one of my most recent, Lives of the Stoics by Ryan Holiday, The Art of Living from Zeno to Marcus Aurelius. Some of my favorite books from Ryan Holiday: The Obstacle is the Way, Stillness is the Key. All these books that he's written really have a backbone of Stoicism within it. And this year I really got into it because of obviously 2020. It's a really tough year. And from what I read with the Stoics, they really understood how to handle difficult situations. I mean, Marcus Aurelius, one of the greatest kings and emperors of Rome of all time, had to deal with a pandemic like us. many moons ago, right? For those who don't know what Stoic philosophy is, I have a definition right here, so let me read that off to you. So, definition of Stoicism, it's an ancient Greek school of philosophy founded by at Athens by Zeno of Citium, who's the first philosopher in the book. The school taught that virtue, the highest good, is based on knowledge. The wise live in harmony with the divine reason, also identified with fate and providence that governs nature, and are indifferent to the vicissitudes of fortune and to pleasure and pain. So basically, the Stoics really valued 4 virtues. Those virtues are wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. Ryan Holiday or Robert Greene. Robert Greene wrote things like the 48 Laws of Power, Mastery, and all these other books. And Ryan Holiday is kind of a student of Robert Greene. Robert Greene is his mentor. So he writes very similar to that. So this book was very similar to that. It's like 25 biographies in one book, and I love books like that because I get to live so many different lives in one place. And what's cool is that there were actually two, I believe, women Stoics. So that was something very uncommon back in the day. They were pretty badass. So highly recommend Lives of the Stoics. And the biggest takeaway for me here that I wrote is that history has so many lessons, and throughout this book I was seeing things that these people went through that we're still going through to this day. And it's kind of funny how life is so cyclical and it tends to repeat itself, and that sometimes history can be our greatest teacher when it comes to that. So highly recommend Lives of the Stoics. Some of my favorite Stoics is Cleanthes, Cato, obviously Marcus Aurelius. So Lives of the Stoics, number 2. And 3, we have The Madness of Crowds. Now, aside from COVID, we had a lot of other things come up when it came to the media. And when it comes to this book, obviously I heard Douglas Murray in an interview, and it really sparked interest in this, because you take someone who's an intellectual to explain these things. That we are social creatures, obviously. So we follow crowds. We're very much social creatures, and no matter how independent you try to be, you will follow a crowd eventually. This book was pretty triggering. We live the triggering year. Folks who read this book, I say warning. There's a warning label to reading this. I highly recommend it though, because I'm a big, if anything, what this year taught me is that I trust you, but I need to verify. Like, I will trust what people say, but I will verify first before I continue down that, because what am I being fed in terms of knowledge? And that was probably my biggest takeaway. And one thing I like that Murray said in an interview is that they're making us madder than we ought to be, because social media is dangerous. Social media will cater to you like candy. It gives you candy. I mean, if you watch The Social Dilemma, they explain it as if, social media is just a fast food. And I don't like fast food. I'm a holistic health coach. I love whole foods, right? So when I think of whole foods, books are that to me, because it took someone a lot of years and research to write things like this. So Madness of Crowd really taught me that. I know it's not part of the book, but he goes through, it's only 4 chapters. He goes through LGBTQ plus, feminism, racism, and then transsexuality, and why these things have been so in our face. And I know that this year was mostly the Black Lives Matter movement, but it's very similar when you talk about crowds and a lot of people talking about these things who may not be as educated as you think. So be careful who you listen to. And he has a lot of facts and wonderful data here. And he doesn't give any answers. That was my biggest, what I really like this book is that he'll give you questions to think about. And that's the power right now. There's power in questions, not answers. So Madness of Crowds. One of the other books, number 4, would be The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. Now, this book is about the journey beyond yourself. And obviously with a year as tumultuous as 2020, I needed time to really dig into me. And this book really came, it was like the beginning of COVID. Everything was shut down here in California, in the Bay Area where I live. And I had to dig into the metaphysical, which is a part of my coaching, four virtues, you can say, is the metaphysical. It's something beyond myself, because without that belief, you can live a pretty depressing life. If you're out there, I'm not religious, but I respect religion to a certain extent, obviously. But this book really was beautifully written. I can see why so many people love it. It's come up for me multiple times, so this was the year I felt like it was time to read it, because it's always been recommended in podcasts I listen to, friends. It's always come up. So I was like, finally, I decided to sit in and read it. And what's great about this book is literally you could turn to any page and there's a golden nugget of wisdom. I don't want to read a long one. Just turn to page 94, 95. 95 has a great quote. When your mind starts telling you what you have to do to make everything inside okay, don't buy into what it's telling you. The truth is, everything will be okay as soon as you are okay with everything. And that's the only time everything will be okay. It's simple stuff, but we tend to forget things, especially with the madness of the world right now. And this was a great book to kind of read. I read it before bed every night, and it really brought slumber to my life. My biggest takeaway from this book was just finding the way. Funny enough, going back to Musashi, they talk about the way of the samurai, or the way, which is the Tao. And he talks about that in this book as well. It's just like, follow your way. And, you know, I was at the time of reading this book, there were a lot of things personally that came up for me. Like, you know, there is a mission that I have on this planet, but there's so many missions, so many things to do, so many things that that need attention. Like, there's all these things that require attention, and the media really accentuates that. But what is my mission? Do I need to be part of that? And that brought up that question. And sometimes you have to be like, no, there are people, wonderful people out there already doing the work. If that's not something that I'm like 10,000% passionate about, I am passionate about it. But is it my mission, right? Is it my way? And that's the questions that came up during the Untethered Soul for me. And number 5, a book that really, once again, another one that kept coming up over the last few years, The Body Keeps the Score, by Bessel van der Kolk, all about trauma. And I read this book because obviously the work that I do, sometimes things as coach, sometimes these things come up. And when you ask questions of your clients, things may come up. They talk about their childhood. They talk about things that have happened to them in the past. And you always wonder, like, where does that come from? Does everyone suffer from this? And, you know, interestingly enough, trauma is very, very common. It's kind of an equalizer. No matter if you come from a family that has money and all that stuff, or you come from a impoverished family, we all struggle through something. So this really brought into the light that we're all human. I cannot hate anyone. I don't know their story. I don't know their background. I don't understand the traumas that they go into. But it's really on how trauma affects us physically, mentally, emotionally, in all ways, like to the point that we hold trauma in our bodies in certain parts. So if there's a nagging pain that's been nagging you for many, many years, even in the book, mind you, he's a medical doctor. And this may sound a little woo-woo, but that, you know, our body holds in with the right protocol, you can heal through that trauma. And most of the time, it's not required that you take a pill. Pills are not going to fix the cause, or at least the root cause. It will help you deal with it in the short term, but in the long term, it will actually do more damage than good. So this book really had a lot of amazing stories based on the clients he's worked with. Goes through many, many different options to handle trauma and how to work through it, obviously with a working professional. But reading this book, if you're anyone that works in nurse, doctor, therapist, your MSW, I highly recommend everyone to read, especially if you come from a dysfunctional family, and I think we all do to a certain extent. Like, after reading this book, I was like, I think everyone needs therapy, but it's, therapy is being normalized, and that's great. But also have somebody to talk about it with, because it will bring up some stuff. Okay, last book on my list here is Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It. Now, Kamal Ravikant, I believe, wrote an article and it turned into a book. I was having a really hard time with all this stuff going on. Anxiety was through the roof, and I was not loving myself like I normally do. I really got into the place of being very hard on myself. I was being hard on other people, including my partner. And I read this book, and I was like, I need to do the exercises, because he has a bunch of exercises. I took a trip. If you follow me on Instagram, you saw that I took a trip to a different part in California, in a cabin, solo, by myself. It was still COVID, but luckily I was able to do this. I had a beach nearby. I was able to see the sunrise every morning. I was completely unplugged, and I did during that trip, it was like 2 days, I did several exercises in this book. One of my favorites being you write out secrets, things you regret, all those things, and you meditate on it, on how you forgive yourself for it, how you love yourself, and no matter all these horrible things that you may have done in your life in the past, and then either you rip it up to shreds and throw it away, burn it, throw it in the ocean, and meditate on the ocean cleansing you. I know it sounds very spiritual if you're not into that, but highly recommend trying it out. I did that and just felt like there was a release when I did that. So I love this book. Definitely one that stays on my favorite books part of my on my bookshelf. And highly recommend it. I've been gifting it to people. So Kamal Ravikant is a beast, and his stories and how he writes is beautiful. So, and then I have a bonus here, so I'll put it here somewhere on the screen. But Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey. I don't have the physical copy. Instead, I listened to it on Audible. He was doing the runaround on podcasts. He was on like everyone's podcast I listened to: Joe Rogan, Aubrey Marcus, Tom Bilyeu. All the podcasts I listened to, he was on them. And I decided to get his book because I love what he was talking about on these podcasts when I heard him on. I've listened to a few audiobooks, and usually listen to them when I'm out on a run, working out. They were okay, but for some reason, Green Lights really took the cake. Like, Matthew McConaughey narrating the book was probably the best narration of any book I've ever heard. Fantastic narration, fun, engaging. He's very passionate. Obviously, it's his story. I'm always a fan of when the author reads the book, because obviously they put their heart and soul in there. But this man had an amazing story, amazing journey, being willing. One of his stories about neglecting almost $15 million to do a movie because he wanted change. Fantastic value. He has poetry in the book, and it's all beautiful. He ends every chapter with kind of like a little poem or a line that really takes your breath away, requires you think. I'll give you a small nugget. One of my favorite small nuggets that I took note of. I took notes on my phone when I would be out running, and you see me sitting there like typing up what he just said. But one of them was like, we have to prepare to have freedom. We have to do the work to then do the job. We have to prepare for the job so we can be free to do the work. Like, a lot of those types of little anecdotes and small golden nuggets that exist throughout the book. Highly, highly recommended. Green Lights, specifically in audible form. It's like listening to David Goggins, which is a close first as well, but I have to say David Goggins' book probably goes second, because he didn't narrate it, someone else did. But I love the ending of every chapter where he has kind of like a mini podcast with the person who narrated his book. But that was one of my favorites. But Green Lights takes the cake. And that was the bonus. So those are 6 of my favorite books with an added bonus, an audio book. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope that this year has been okay for you. Maybe you've read some books that really stuck out to you. Please add them in the comments below. If you read any of these books, please add your 2 cents on what your takeaway was. And as always, once again, please like, subscribe if you enjoyed this video. There'll be many more. And share this with a friend that may be an avid book reader. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much, folks. Peace.